what are you doing here?" Early one morning at the garbage dump, I saw a small girl rummaging through the trash. Her clothes were dirty, her hair was a mess, and she was eating rotten bread with single-minded focus. But when she turned to look at me, I was struck speechless with surprise. Because that child was my 6-year-old granddaughter. Why? This child 2 years ago. I hurriedly contacted my son, who replied with confusion, "We've only ever had boys." After that, I would come to discover a terrifying truth unlike anything I had ever experienced before. I'm a part-time housewife who's finished raising her children. Though I was lonely after losing my police officer husband, I was enjoying a carefree retirement on my own. My son Tim already has his own family, with 1 girl and 1 boy. Kind and caring Blair, and easygoing Sebastian. My adorable grandchildren. Even from a parent's perspective, they had built an exemplary, peaceful home. My house, my daughter-in-law's parents' house, and my son's family's house were all in the same city. We had a good relationship as relatives, occasionally visiting each other. If there was one thing that concerned me, it might be my son's wife, Sandra. She was what you'd call a young lady from a good family, and her parents were successful businesspeople who owned several properties. A bit different from our ordinary family, with a different sensibility. Sandra had grown up getting everything she wanted from a young age, and even in her 30s, she still seemed to rely on her parents and others, as my son had mentioned. The other day, there was a field trip for Blair's kindergarten, and since Sandra said it would be hard to take Christian by herself, I went along too. "Oh, that sounds fun." Yes. But Sandra was glued to Sebastian the whole time. I know he's younger so it can't be helped, but Blair looked a bit lonely. A father using his vacation days to participate in his child's event to reduce his wife's burden was unfamiliar in my time, but I suppose this is how modern parents are. Still, from a man's perspective, it's not a bad feeling to be relied upon. Apparently, Sandra wasn't a spoiled young lady in college, but rather a popular girl who made people want to protect her. My son was no exception, being one of those charmed by her. Since such minor things didn't interfere with daily life, neither my son nor I made a big deal out of it. But that everyday life changed dramatically in the summer when Blair was 4 and Christian was 2, when they went camping as a family. An incident occurred. Unbelievably, Blair went missing when her parents took their eyes off her for a moment. My son and his wife searched desperately, but they couldn't find Blair. Of course, I and Sandra's parents also did everything we could to find Blair. We even recruited volunteers and involved the media in a big commotion. However, unfortunately, a typhoon hit the area the day after they went camping, hampering the search. 3 days later, shoes and belongings thought to be Blair's were found downstream in the river. Of course, due to the heavy rain, the river's flow had become faster and the water level had risen. These factors led to the conclusion that Blair had passed away, and the search was regrettably called off. While the whole family was grieving, the one who never accepted it was Sandra. "Please keep looking. I'll pay as much as it takes. She's definitely still alive." Her figure clinging to those around her who hesitated with words like, "We're so sorry, but," was pitiful to watch. It's understandable. After all, it was her first child. There's no way she could give up so easily. But still, that child is probably, even with so many people and so much time invested, Blair couldn't be found. Even if she were found, everyone, including myself, thought she wouldn't be alive anymore. Since then, Sandra blamed herself, saying, "It's my fault that my daughter." And for a time, she fell into a very dangerous state. She hurt herself, stopped eating, couldn't go out, wouldn't speak to anyone. You still have Sebastian. If you disappear, you'll make him feel the same pain you're feeling. My son and I desperately supported and encouraged Sandra, and it took 2 years for her to recover from her despair. Christian turned 4, and Sandra rarely became depressed anymore, but... What? You're buying again. We just bought a toy car last week. It can wait. If you want a new one, maybe for your birthday. Christian says he wants it now. Who knows if next time will ever come. Sandra began fulfilling all of Christian's wishes and pouring money into him, as if to make up for what she couldn't do for Blair. Of course, if this continued, Christian's selfishness would only increase, and he gradually stopped listening not only to his grandparents like me and his maternal grandparents, but even to his father, Tim. However, because of the incident with Blair, no one in the family could caution Sandra. Her parents, if anything, seemed to become even more active in providing financial support and taking care of Christian, perhaps out of pity for Sandra. I understand it can't be helped, but it feels like things are heading in a bad direction. While harboring such concerns, one day I woke up early and decided to go for a walk while taking out the trash. Come to think of it, recently the neighbors had been saying that there'd been an increase in mischief like trash bags being opened. In my area, you can put out trash from the night before, so a considerable amount of kitchen waste had been put out by early morning. Therefore, measures against crows and stray cats were thorough, so it was rumored to be the work of humans. Huh? What's that? As I was thinking about this and about to turn the corner of the street, I heard a rustling sound from the garbage dump a little distance away. I noticed a large shadow rummaging through the trash bags and instinctively stopped in my tracks. Mischief. A homeless person. This is unpleasant. What should I do? I felt compelled to do something since I had seen it. As I approached little by little, the figure gradually came into clear view. That's a person, right? A child. The sight I saw at the garbage dump shrouded in morning mist is one I will never forget for the rest of my life. The figure of a small child prying open the mouth of a bag and frantically stuffing rotten bread into their cheeks. What are you doing here? I found myself saying loudly without thinking. The child who looked at me, startled and trembling, seemed to freeze in surprise and showed no signs of running away. Her clothes and body were dirty, and her hair was unkempt. I could tell at a glance that something was not right. The child and I stared at each other for a while, saying nothing. Oh no. It's good that I called out, but what should I do next? If it were an animal, I could shoo it away, and if it were a strange person, I was planning to run away. You shouldn't eat things like this. You'll get sick. After thinking it over, I decided to speak in a gentle tone to try to put her at ease. However, as I approached, the child made a gesture as if covering her head and began apologizing repeatedly, saying, "I'm sorry." Hearing the same words repeated like a broken record, I was at a loss. Calm down. I'm not angry. It's okay. As I got closer to soothe the child, I realized something. I recognized that child's voice and features. Have we met somewhere before? As I peered into the child's face, she seemed to sense something about me too. Blair. Yes. I'm Blair. Hearing her words, I gasped. This child was my granddaughter who was supposed to have died 2 years ago. Is it really you? Are you really Blair? She nodded in response to my question. Where had she been and what had she been doing for 2 years? Should I report this? Various thoughts were swirling in my head, but for now, I took her to my home for protection. I kind of remember Grandma's house. After giving her food, having her take a shower, and dressing her in clean clothes, she seemed to have enough composure to reminisce about my house she hadn't visited in a long time. While I was trying my best to smile so as not to upset Blair, who had finally calmed down, I remember feeling extremely anxious inside. Because Blair's body was covered in marks from being hit and pinched. She should have been 6 years old at this time, but she looked short for her age and seemed underweight. Then, there was something even more perplexing. Despite clearly not having been taken care of, Blair had somehow acquired a certain level of education. She understood table manners during meals, and could read, write, and do simple calculations. Since a child can't acquire living habits on their own, it means she must have been living with someone all this time. I was elated to know Blair was alive, but when I thought about it, doesn't this have criminal implications? Once I thought that, I suddenly became afraid of dealing with the problem alone. So, the first thing I thought to do was contact my son. Mom, are you okay? Aren't you dreaming? The time was 6 a.m. If you suddenly get a call from your mother early in the morning saying, your granddaughter who was supposed to be dead has returned, that kind of reaction is understandable. Blair disappeared 2 years ago. We only have a boy now. Get a hold of yourself. My son's voice on the phone sounded somewhat sad and angry. I thought it was the right decision not to contact Sandra first. It would be pitiful to say something confusing just as she had finally accepted her daughter's disappearance and was starting to look forward. I wouldn't joke about something like this. Just come to my house. I almost forcibly summoned my son to the house and had him meet Blair. Dad? Blair? Is it really you, Blair? Seeing their reactions, I breathed a sigh of relief. Despite meeting after 2 years, Blair clearly remembered her father's face. How happy that must have made my son. Where have you been all this time? How did you survive? Were you taken by someone? Did you escape and come here? Hey, don't say things that will make her anxious. My son kept asking questions that I had deliberately avoided asking. Firing off questions one after another was making Blair confused. However, contrary to such concerns, she slowly shook her head. "You know, I've been." She slowly and calmly began to speak. "My son and I, who learned the whole terrifying, sad, and shocking truth, couldn't forgive the person who had tormented her for 2 years. So, we decided to have them receive appropriate punishment. To avoid alerting the culprit, we entrusted Blair to someone we could trust after explaining the situation, and we continued our usual lives as if nothing had happened for a while. We gathered collaborators and prepared for any contingencies. It was on the morning of the 5th day after rescuing Blair that I received a call from my son saying, 'I found out where that person is going. Mom, I think I should go alone after all. We don't know what might happen.' What are you saying at this point? The preparations are ready, so don't worry." We got into Tim's car and headed to a certain place. That place was a villa area a little distance from my house. It was a rental villa quietly tucked away in the most inconspicuous spot among them. Dad said this one is smaller and not in a good location, so it's hard to find buyers. This villa was one of the properties owned by Sandra's parents. With mountains nearby and surrounded by dense trees, this place carved out of the forest would be perfect for hiding people or shady activities. My son and I steeled ourselves and walked towards the garage with the shutter slightly open. It was so dark inside, despite it being daytime, that we couldn't see what was in the back. However, an eerie sound of metal being dragged echoed in the dark, enclosed space. "There's no doubt that person is here. The child isn't here." When I called out towards the sound, a flashlight beam suddenly illuminated my son and me. "Mother-in-law. Tim. Why are you here?" There stood Sandra, holding a metal bat in one hand, rummaging through the garage. "She's not here." I could only repeat my earlier words in a trembling voice. Even though I knew this was coming, when actually faced with it, I still felt fear. Because Sandra's face emerging from the darkness was so uncanny. "No, I was just organizing the garage." Sandra answered without addressing the mention of she, even though we hadn't asked. Her tone of voice was normal, and her mouth was smiling, but her eyes weren't. "We already know everything you've done to your own daughter. Probably by the time we came here, she must have realized that her misdeeds had been discovered. What she intended to do to whom with that bat in her hand, I don't want to think about any further. What were you planning to do to Blair with that metal bat, you devil?" In contrast to me, who was hesitating, Tim confronted Sandra head-on. It's understandable, given that he couldn't see his beloved daughter for 2 years, and the culprit who had kept Blair in terrible conditions was right in front of him. Devil? Me? No, she's the devil. Triggered by Tim's words, Sandra struck the bat on the floor and threw a tantrum. "Sandra, why? What did Blair do to you?" I had decided my first child would be a boy, but she ruined everything by being born. "What are you talking about? What kind of nonsense is this?" Listening carefully to my daughter-in-law's story, it was an utterly ridiculous and selfish reasoning. When Sandra was pregnant with Blair, she was consistently told by the doctor during regular checkups that the baby in her belly was a boy. My daughter-in-law, who had been hoping for a boy, was overjoyed and bought many baby items for boys during her pregnancy. I remember that well. However, a girl was born. Even if the gender was different from expected, a child is a child. A grandchild is a grandchild. There's no way they wouldn't be lovable. My son and I had considered it as a funny story to laugh about. But my daughter-in-law was different. I bought cute clothes and bragged to my friends, but it all went to waste and I was embarrassed. That's just your convenience. Besides, when Sebastian was born, we could pass down the clothes we bought then to him, so nothing went to waste. It doesn't mean anything if it's not the first child. You wouldn't understand. Even I, as a woman who has experienced childbirth, couldn't understand her obsession, so it's natural that my son wouldn't understand. All the baby clothes Sebastian wore were Blair's hand-me-downs. Poor thing. But I tried, you know. I tried to accept Blair. But I just couldn't do it. My daughter-in-law shrugged with a half-smile. I'm not cut out for patience. I've never had anything not go my way before. If she wasn't here, I could give more love to my son. Her expression as she said this with wide eyes was strangely confident, as if she were saying something completely natural. What do you mean by love? Is spending a lot of money your idea of love? That's how my parents always treated me. But don't you think I'm kind? I kept that child alive and raised her. I even educated her. I gave her a reason to live. Out of sadness and anger, I involuntarily covered my face with both hands. What Blair had told us herself was true. On that day when I discovered Blair at the garbage dump, she gradually told us what had happened to her. During the camping trip, she said she was taken to a villa by a man claiming to be Sandra's friend in order to stay in a makeshift living space created in the garage. How did you bring Blair here? At that time, you never left Sebastian's side, right? In this world, there are people who will do anything if you pay them enough. Of course, it would be troublesome afterwards if I did it myself. Blair had also talked about the meaning of life that Sandra wanted to give her daughter. Blair said she had to earn money for her brother and mom. That's right. I taught her that over 2 years. I felt nauseous at Sandra's complete lack of remorse. Is that what a mother does? That child said she thought if she worked hard to earn money, her mom would smile again. Huh. So she still thought she was loved. Sandra replied, playing with her hair, as if she couldn't care less. The reason Blair had age-appropriate reading and living habits was because otherwise, she couldn't be made to earn money. Sandra really seems to think only in terms of money. No, to me, she no longer looked like a person in human form, but a monster, and it seemed Tim felt the same way. Hey, you told Blair she didn't need to learn anything else. That customers prefer stupid ones. What were you planning to make our daughter do? Do you want to know? Saying this, Sandra let out a creepy laugh. Tim, stop it. I restrained my son who was about to grab Sandra. Even if she's this kind of person, if we lay hands on her first, it would put my son at a disadvantage. I was also full of the desire to lunge at her, but I decided to hold back here. But that brat really has no guts. Just because I skipped bringing food for 3 days, would a normal person go rummaging through garbage? I failed. I never thought she could go that far on her own. Sandra grumbled in frustration, which was nothing short of abnormal. Stop it. How could you say such terrible things? You guys asked, didn't you? Besides, doesn't everyone throw away things they don't need? Her attitude of speaking as if it were common sense really angered me. Her parents are said to be decent people, so how did such a monster come to be? We'll turn you over to the police. Be prepared to face the law. Huh? What are you talking about? Of course, you, Blair, and everyone else will have to disappear. As soon as she said this, Sandra took out a lighter from her pocket and pointed it towards a nearby car. Looking closely, gasoline was leaking from the car body, wetting the floor. You idiot, stop this foolishness. That's right, if you do that, even you. Shut up. Sandra hit the car body with the bat, causing a large dent and more gasoline to drip. If things don't go my way, it's better if everyone becomes charred and disappears. Sandra shouted while laughing loudly, clearly out of her mind. Persuasion is no longer possible. There's no choice. I softened my expression and spoke gently to Sandra. I understand. It must have been hard for you all alone. I'll be on your side, so please put down the lighter. Mom, what are you saying? When I gave a subtle eye signal to my surprised son, he seemed to understand my intention. Sandra, I'm sorry. I apologize. We won't tell anyone. We'll do as you say, so please help us. When Tim also showed signs of complying with Sandra, she smiled with satisfaction. Put your hands behind your back. Sit facing the wall. As we did as she said, Sandra slowly started walking, not taking her eyes off us. Where's Blair? She's with my friend. She's at the house 2 doors down from ours. The moment Sandra stood at the entrance of the garage, at Tim's signal, sturdy older men who had been hiding nearby all rushed to restrain Sandra at once. They shouted, "Secured!" Caught in the act, while swiftly subduing Sandra. What is this? Let go of me. These people are retired former police officers, all friends of my husband. They've remained close to me even after my husband passed away. When I told them about my granddaughter's situation, they agreed to cooperate fully. Actually, my pocket had contained a mobile phone in an ongoing call the whole time. The phone was connected to these friends. They were the ones who said, to ensure Blair doesn't return to her mother's custody, let's gather solid evidence. All of our exchanges have been recorded, and there are this many witnesses. Stop your unsightly behavior now. It will only make your crime more severe. Shut up, you old hag. You think you can do this to me and get away with it? I'm going to tell Daddy and Mommy. I was so dumbfounded by her textbook villainous words that I couldn't find a response. Hey, Tim. Don't you feel anything seeing your wife like this? Help me. I'm the mother of your child. I can only feel hatred for you now. We don't need a mother who torments her children." Tim was straightforward, showing no lingering affection for the woman he once loved. "No way. Mother-in-law. Blair won't abandon me, right? She said she'd work hard for me. Besides, taking a child away from their mother. Are you serious? Do you really think such emotional blackmail will work?" I wished she hadn't turned to me here, but perhaps she thought I might still be swayed as a fellow mother. She underestimated me. There are many children who forgive their parents no matter how terribly they're treated. Blair is kind, so she probably still likes you. That's right. That's right. Mother-in-law, I knew you'd understand. Because we're both mothers. Stop it. Don't lump me in with you. I looked straight at Sandra with a serious gaze. Blair had her existence erased for 2 years, her rights taken away, unloved and alone. She's just a 6-year-old girl. As I spoke, I desperately held back the tears that threatened to come. I should have searched more thoroughly. I should have noticed Sandra's abnormality. If I had, we might have been able to save Blair earlier. For Blair's sake, we can't forgive you. Everything you tried to do to her will now come back to you. What? What do you mean? When you return, there will be no one waiting for you. You'll lose your home, family, and friends. You'll be unloved, eventually forgotten, and meet a lonely end. Hearing this, Sandra's face instantly turned pale, and she began to cry. Considering what you did to Blair and what you were planning to do, it's only natural retribution. By this time, active police officers had arrived. They exchanged salutes with my friends and dragged away the screaming Sandra. Blair's physical condition, testimony, and the recorded evidence were decisive, and Sandra was arrested. She ended up spending some time behind bars. My son divorced her and gained custody, demanding a lump sum payment of $20,000 in compensation and $150,000 in child support, all of which was paid. Sandra's parents also apologized. They said, "We made a mistake in raising our daughter. We won't be involved with her anymore," and sold their properties to move to a distant state. My son and I also moved to a new place and are living a new life. Blair has started attending kindergarten and is now happily surrounded by kind friends and teachers. Blair, who is looking forward to starting elementary school, and cute Christian who follows her around. I intend to continue showering them both with lots of love.